January 30th, 1945. The Colmar Pocket, Alsace, Juro 347 hours. The night was absolute. A moonless winter darkness had settled over the frozen French countryside like a shroud, the kind of cold that made breath crystallize instantly and turned rifle bolts sluggish with frost. In the German foxholes scattered across the snow-covered fields south of Jebsheim, Obergefreiter Klaus Mehring pressed his face against the frozen earth, listening. The silence was unnatural, thick, suffocating. 22 years old, a veteran of 3 winters on the Eastern Front, Mehring knew the sound of artillery preparation, the rhythmic thunder that preceded every American assault. But this was different. This was the sound of engines, deep, rumbling mechanical growls that seemed to come from the earth itself. He could not see them yet. None of them could, but they could hear them approaching through that impenetrable darkness, and somehow that was worse. In the mythology of the Wehrmacht, the soldier had been taught that war was comprehensible, a contest of will, courage, and superior German discipline against numerically superior but spiritually inferior enemies. Tank against tank, man against man. The mathematics of combat reduced to training, determination, and the purity of Prussian military tradition. Nothing in that mythology had prepared them for what was about to emerge from the winter night. Nothing in the entire history of warfare had prepared any army for the psychological devastation of flame warfare, mechanized, mobilized, and brought to bear against fixed positions in darkness. The first indication came not as sound, but as light. A sudden, brilliant orange glow appeared on the western horizon, illuminating the underside of low-hanging clouds with an infernal radiance. Then another, and another. The Americans had brought their flame tanks forward, M4 Shermans modified with the POA-ACWS H5 flame projector system, weapons that could throw napalm-thickened fuel in arcing streams reaching 200 feet, burning at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. What the German defenders witnessed in those first moments was not military technology, but elemental transformation. Night converted to day, winter cold replaced by searing heat, and the orderly geometry of defensive warfare dissolved into primordial chaos. Mehring would later tell American interrogators that he had faced Soviet T-34s at Kursk, had survived the grinding attrition of the Rzhev salient, had endured Katyusha rocket barrages that turned entire forests into splinters. But this was different. This violated something fundamental in the soldier's contract with reality. You could prepare yourself for shells, he said, through a translator at the POW camp near Dijon. You could dig deeper, find better cover, but fire that came in waves, that followed you into your hole, that turned the air itself into a weapon? How do you fight that? How do you even think clearly when your world is burning? The American flamethrower tank was not a new weapon in January 1945. The Marine Corps had employed them with devastating effectiveness in the Pacific theater since Tarawa in 1943. But the European theater, with its emphasis on mobile warfare and breakthrough operations, had seen limited deployment until the grinding winter campaigns of late 1944 and early 1945. The Colmar Pocket, a German-held salient west of the Rhine that the Allies needed to eliminate before any crossing could be attempted, presented ideal conditions: entrenched defenders, fortified villages, and German determination to hold every metre of ground. It was here, in the frozen fields of Alsace, that flame tanks would demonstrate their psychological impact on Wehrmacht soldiers who still believed in the superiority of conventional military courage. The 2nd Armoured Division's after-action report, filed on February 3, 1945, noted the deployment of 6 flame tanks in the assault on German positions around Jebsheim. The report's clinical language, flame projectors utilized to neutralize fortified structures and suppress enemy resistance, concealed what actually occurred in those pre-dawn hours. When the first Sherman flame tank, nicknamed Zippo by its crew, opened up on a German machine gun nest at approximately 352 hours, the effect was instantaneous and total. The stream of ignited napalm, clearly visible as a liquid rope of fire in the darkness, struck the position and simply erased it. The log bunker, reinforced with railroad ties and covered with frozen earth, became an inferno in seconds. The defenders had no time to retreat, no opportunity to surrender. They were there, and then they were consumed. The German soldiers in adjacent positions watched this happen. They watched comrades transformed into human torches, watched the fundamental rules of combat, take cover, return fire, maintain discipline, rendered meaningless by a weapon that redefined the battlefield itself. Within minutes, entire sections of the German defensive line were abandoning their positions, not in organized retreat, but in pure panic flight. A Wehrmacht captain named Friedrich Volker, captured the following day, attempted to explain the collapse to American intelligence officers. "My men had faced Russian attacks for 2 years. They knew how to hold under artillery, how to counterattack enemy infantry. But this was not war as we understood it. This was something else entirely." What Volker was describing, though he lacked the vocabulary for it, was the fundamental psychological distinction between industrial warfare and thermal warfare. Artillery kills by fragmentation and concussion, impersonal, mechanical, survivable with proper cover. Small arms fire can be returned, creating an exchange in which training and courage matter. But flame warfare operates on a different psychological register entirely. Fire triggers primordial fear, encoded deep in human neurology, fears older than civilization itself. When that fire comes not from static flamethrowers that can be avoided or destroyed, but from mobile armor platforms that can pursue fleeing defenders while projecting 200 feet of liquid flame, the soldier's mental calculus collapses entirely. The tactical effectiveness was matched by the symbolic power. Throughout the war, German propaganda had emphasized the technical sophistication of Wehrmacht equipment, the precision of German engineering, the superiority of German tactical doctrine. Flame tanks inverted that entire symbolic structure. Here was American industrial capacity, crude, overwhelming, absolute, transformed into a weapon that bypassed all German military virtues. You could not outmaneuver flame. You could not defeat it with superior training. You could not endure it through Prussian discipline. You could only flee from it, and in fleeing acknowledge the total inadequacy of everything the Wehrmacht had taught you about warfare and yourself. In the farmhouse that served as the German battalion command post, Major Ernst Kessler received increasingly desperate radio reports from forward positions. "They're burning everything. We can't hold against the fire. Request permission to fall back." Kessler, 43 years old, holder of the Iron Cross First Class from the Polish campaign, found himself confronting an impossible situation. His training, his entire understanding of military command, demanded that he order his men to hold their positions. But how could he order men to remain in foxholes when those foxholes could be transformed into crematoriums in seconds? How could he ask soldiers to maintain discipline when the enemy possessed a weapon that rendered discipline suicidal? He gave the order to withdraw at 04:15 hours. The American attack had been underway for less than 30 minutes. The psychological impact extended far beyond the Colmar pocket. As the Wehrmacht's intelligence apparatus compiled reports from survivors throughout February and March 1945, a disturbing pattern emerged. Units that had never encountered flame tanks were already demonstrating reduced combat effectiveness based solely on rumors and second-hand accounts. A German NCO captured near Saarbrücken in March told interrogators, "Everyone knew about the fire tanks by then. We didn't know exactly what they looked like or how they worked, but we knew they existed, and we knew that if they came, there was no point in fighting. Better to surrender immediately than to burn." This represented something unprecedented in Wehrmacht experience, a weapon so psychologically devastating that its reputation alone degraded combat effectiveness. Soviet forces on the Eastern Front had been numerous, often savage, but comprehensible within the German military framework. American and British forces had been materially superior, but still operating within recognizable parameters of conventional warfare. The flame tank existed outside those parameters entirely. It was industrial might made manifest as elemental force, and it revealed the hollowness of every ideological claim the Third Reich had made about will, discipline, and racial superiority. When fire came for you, none of that mattered. You burned the same as anyone else. In the immediate aftermath of the Colmar pocket operations, American commanders noted something remarkable: the dramatic increase in German surrender rates when flame tanks were merely rumored to be present. At the Rhine crossing in March, entire Wehrmacht companies abandoned positions when loudspeakers announced that flame units were being brought forward, even when no such units existed. The weapon had transcended its physical form to become pure psychological force, a symbol of American capacity to deploy technologies that rendered traditional military resistance meaningless. The flame tank itself became something of a totem in those final months of the European war. American crews nicknamed their vehicles Zippos, Satan, Dragon, names that acknowledged the primal power they wielded. But within those crews, many struggled with what they were doing. Staff Sergeant Raymond Briggs, commander of a flame tank in the 739th Tank Battalion, wrote to his sister in April 1945. "It's effective. God knows it's effective. But there's nothing clean about it. When you burn out a pillbox, you know exactly what's happening to the men inside. You can hear them sometimes, even over the engine noise. I keep telling myself they would have killed us if they could, but that doesn't make the dreams any easier." This ambivalence revealed something essential about the weapon's nature. Unlike artillery or aerial bombardment, which create physical and psychological distance between killer and killed, flame warfare is intimate. The tank crew sees what they are doing. They witness the transformation of human beings into burning shapes. There is no abstract target or objective, only people being immolated at close range. This intimacy worked both ways. The German defenders saw their fate approaching with terrible clarity, saw the liquid fire arcing toward them with nowhere to hide, and understood with absolute certainty what would happen when it reached them. By April to 1945, as Allied forces penetrated deep into Germany itself, the mere presence of flame tanks in American columns was sufficient to trigger mass surrenders. Wehrmacht officers who had once commanded divisions with confidence now sought only to avoid the fire tanks, to position their dwindling forces anywhere those orange-painted Shermans were not reported. The weapon had achieved what strategic bombing, artillery barrages, and numerical superiority alone could not: the complete psychological defeat of enemy forces before contact even occurred. Klaus Mehring survived the Colmar pocket and the remainder of the war. Repatriated to Germany in 1947, he rarely spoke of his military service except to emphasize a single, recurring detail: the light. "People think of night as safe," he told his grandson decades later, "darkness as protection, but the Americans could turn night into day whenever they wanted. They could make the air burn. What kind of power is that? What kind of nation has that kind of power and the will to use it?" His question contained within it the deeper psychological impact of American flame warfare. It demonstrated not merely technical capacity, but the willingness to deploy that capacity with total commitment. The Third Reich had built its entire ideological structure on the mythology of superior will, on the claim that Germanic peoples possessed unique determination to use force without hesitation. The flame tank inverted that mythology completely. Here was American industrial democracy, supposedly soft and materialistic, deploying weapons so terrible that even hardened Wehrmacht veterans broke and ran. It revealed that all the speeches, all the propaganda, all the claims of ideological superiority meant nothing when confronted with a nation that could produce such weapons in quantity and possessed the resolve to use them without restraint. In the final accounting, flame tanks destroyed relatively few German soldiers directly, perhaps a few thousand across the entire European theatre, but they induced the surrender or flight of tens of thousands more, and degraded the combat effectiveness of entire armies through psychological impact alone. They transformed night into day, winter into summer, and the orderly geometry of defensive warfare into primordial chaos. They demonstrated that for all of the Wehrmacht's training, experience, and ideological conviction, there existed weapons against which courage itself was meaningless. On the night of January 30th, 1945, in the frozen darkness of the Colmar pocket, Klaus Mehring learned what American industrial power actually meant. It meant that when fire came for you, brilliant, terrible, absolute, there was nothing your training could do, nothing your courage could change, nothing your ideology could protect. There was only the light turning night into day, and the choice to flee or burn. Some lessons can only be learned in fire. And some fires, once witnessed, can never be forgotten.